بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خاتم النبيين وإمام المرسلين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We're going on into the 7th lesson of Al-Bayquniyah, and we've so far covered an introduction to the science of Hadith, its position in the Islamic law, what it means, what it deals with, and explained what makes a hadith sahih, meaning authentic, or hasan, meaning good or accepted. We've dealt with the requirements of each type. We've given more definitions related to those requirements and the different levels within each of those two classifications. And we've discussed the difference between Bukhari and Muslim, why Imam Bukhari's collection is higher than Muslim's, and we covered what the ruling is with regards to what it means to the sacred law that we now have a hadith that's classified as sahih or hasan. Although this seems like a lot of material to have gone through, the overall picture is much simpler than that. If you only had a couple of minutes to explain the science of hadith terminology to someone, it's not a complicated task to complete and accomplish. The science of hadith in general is about examining two things. And that goes regardless whether you study Bayquniyah or Nukhbat al-Fikr for Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, or go through the Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah, or study the Alfiyat al-Suyuti or Alfiyat al-Iraqi. And you can go on with different hadith texts. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, all of this is detail related to examining two things: the chains of transmission through investigating the transmitter's trustworthiness and comparing those chains against each other, and examining the text content of the narrations being transmitted and comparing similar texts against each other while taking the chains of transmission into account. Now, these 2 points make a difficult task seem easy. People literally will spend lifetimes dedicated to this field of study. It's time-consuming, it requires a lot of patience, it requires an individual who has a keen eye for anomalies and really an obsessive character. The highest status one can attain is to be a scholar of fiqh as well as a scholar of hadith, which is not that common. We are learning terminology here, but that doesn't make us hadith scholars. You can learn all the way to most advanced terminology and still not be a hadith scholar. The purpose that we're doing this right now, and it's a reminder for us when we need to always, every time you come to class, is to remember why you're doing this. What's your purpose behind studying this? The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith that Imam al-Nawawi chooses to begin his 40 hadith, the Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, with. Imam al-Bukhari in his collection begins his collection with the chapter of revelation, but the first hadith is not about revelation, it's about intention. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, actions are by intentions. And so we have to clarify what our intention is of this class. And the intention is for us to gain an understanding of how the Islamic tradition works. Because we're living in very strange times. Nowadays we have Muslims who can't even recite the Quran or even Surah Al-Fatiha with proper tajweed, coming up with their own interpretations of verses in order to reject the Sunnah. Or they are, for some reason, mystified by the West and science and whatnot, and so they come across a hadith and they may not have a proper understanding even of the hadith itself or of the science they're coming up with, and then they're just rejecting the hadith in favor of something they heard an atheist say regarding science, and they feel that it's conflicting and contradictory. So the point here is to understand what this whole tradition is about, and why do we know that these hadiths are valid, and why do we use them, and what are they used for, and whatnot. You need to understand something. Although the different Muslim groups, whether they're Sunnis or Ibadis or Shia or Zaydis, etc., they may not have accepted several hadiths that others accept. We have hadiths that the Shia, for example, won't accept, or the Shia have hadiths that we won't accept, and so on and so forth. You go to the Ibadis, the Zaydis, we have our differences in what we accept. But all of them have a tradition of hadith science that relies upon the same basis as we described so far. The difference really comes about in whether the chains related by the Sunnis are accepted by the Shia or the Abadis, or the Zaydis and so on. Some groups have gone to unjustified extremes. At least from the Sunni perspectives, we can confirm, and we have evidence for this, that we didn't really go to such extreme. For example, Imam al-Bukhari relates hadiths in his collection where there were men in his chains of transmission following Kharijite theology. They were Khawarij. We consider such a theology as an innovation. They were mubtadi'een in the Aqidah, but part of their Aqidah actually says that lying is a kabira, it's an extreme sin, and major sin that would put them in hellfire, and actually they couldn't do it. It would take them out of the folds of Islam, so they weren't liars. They were very trustworthy individuals. So Imam al-Bukhari in those cases, and in cases similar to that, he accepted hadiths from different people who were accused of having problems in their theologies. But he added another condition to his conditions, which was that, to the conditions that we've discussed about what makes a hadith sahih. And his condition was that the hadith cannot be related to their innovation in aqidah or sect or whatever. So as long as their hadith didn't have to do with their theology, he was fine accepting if they were a trustworthy individual. So that's a major thing that we wanted to discuss and just clarify before we go on to the next couple of lines of this text, inshaAllah. So now we can go on to the weak hadith. The author, may Allah have mercy on him and benefit us from his knowledge in both abodes, inshaAllah. He says, وَكُلُّ مَا عَنْ رُتْبَةِ الْحُسْنِ قَصُرْ فَهُوَ الضَّعِيفُ وَهُوَ أَقْسَى مَنْ كَثُرْ. So every hadith that doesn't meet the status of Hasan, then it is the weak one, coming in many types. The weak hadith is one that doesn't fulfill all the conditions we've previously discussed to be Sahih or Hasan. And if you recall, these are ittisalu sanad, so connectedness of the chain of transmission, al-adala, uprightness of the transmitters, al-dabt, accuracy of the transmitters, adam al-shudud, so lack of rogue statements, adam al-illat al-qadiha, so lack of affliction with regards to the transmitters or the hadith itself. And another one that we can add now, because we've covered the Hasan, is عدم وجود العاضد عند الاحتياج إليه وذلك في المستور. So lack of support when needed. If you recall in the past couple of lessons, we talked about صحيح لغيره, حسن لغيره. That's because we had a عاضد. We had another supporting hadith, a supporting chain of transmission that would elevate the hadith to a status of صحيح or حسن لغيره. So when you lack some of these, one of these or some of these conditions, the hadith becomes classified as weak. Now, the weak hadith comes in many types that have mainly been based on how many and which of the conditions are not fulfilled. Ibn Salah came up with 42 types of weakness, and really it just goes back to taking one condition, then you have a hadith that's weak because of this, or taking two conditions or a combination of them, and he came up with 42. Some other scholars have gone up to 63, 81, even 129 types of weaknesses that would classify hadith as weak. Now, obviously, not all of these apply. Much of it has been more academic rigor than anything that's actualized in real life. And this is why Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar, says about all of these divisions, تَعَبٌ لَيْسَ وَرَاءَهُ أَرَبٌ. It's a struggle without any reward and benefit from it. And so he kind of just, he feels that it was a waste of time. At any rate, the major types of weaknesses that we deal with here are three types. The first type is loss of continuity in the chain of transmission. So we have this connected chain of transmission, and all of a sudden we have a loss somewhere. We've lost some people. And that goes into three different types. This loss can either be from the very beginning or up to the end, and that would be called mu'allaq, and that's just one individual that's being lost. If you have the loss at the end, so you have a tabi'i relating this, like Sa'id ibn Musayyab, he was famous for relating marasil. That's called a mursal. He dropped the sahabi. And there's a difference in opinion between the scholars on accepting such hadiths. Imam Malik accepted the marasil, Imam al-Shafi'i did not, except in the case of Sa'id ibn Musayyab, because of the reputation of Sa'id ibn Musayyab was so high and highly regarded that he accepted his marasil. But otherwise, Imam al-Shafi'i needed connected chains of transmission. If it's from the middle, so you have somebody that's lost not at the beginning, not at the end, but in the middle of the chain of transmission, that's called a munqati'. It's cut off. If it's just one person, it's munqati'. If it's two people after each other, so you have two individuals missing from the middle of the chain, that's called mu'dal. Now, among this, the scholars include al-mu'an'an. So if you hear someone saying an fulan, an fulan, an fulan, on the authority of so-and-so, on the authority of so-and-so, on the authority of so-and-so, if that hadith has not been corroborated and checked out to be authentic, then it's also considered weak. Due to the nature, the ambiguous nature of the reference. It's not, I was told by so-and-so, it's on the authority of so-and-so. Like today when I say on the authority of Umar ibn al-Khattab, well, I obviously haven't met Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. It's much different than saying, I was told by Umar ibn al-Khattab. That's the first category of weakness. The second category or type of weakness is loss of the condition of uprightness, suqut al-adala. And that's it could be due to a couple of reasons. It's either because we don't know the specific individual, he's majhul, we just don't have an idea about his character, or we've never heard of him, or he's just an ambiguous individual. And so we don't know whether we can judge him as being upright or not. Or it could be because the person was known outrightly to be a liar and an open sinner. And in that case, the hadith is not only da'if, it's also matruk. We say that it's just, it's left, it's abandoned. The third type of weakness, third category of weakness, is due to suqut al-dabt, loss of accuracy. So that could be because the narrator is forgetful or makes mistakes often. And if he makes mistakes a lot of the time, then it's also matruk, it's also an abandoned hadith, because we now don't know if he's forgetting and he's just making mistakes all over the place. If it's just due to some loss of accuracy, but he's overall okay, we can still trust him, the hadith, it becomes weak, but it's called muttarib. There is some perturbation in his narration. If the hadith has a grave fault, illatun qadiha, it's called mu'allal. And if it's negating what more trustworthy narrators have said, it's called a shadh. So you have a hadith that is narrated, everything seems fine, but the content of it is in opposition to what other more trustworthy narrators have said. In that case, this hadith would be called shadh. It's you would say it's odd or it's rogue in relation to others. So it's a da'if hadith. What is the ruling on acting based on a weak hadith? And this is a big problem amongst Muslims today, and it's due to lack of clarity about what the scholars have said about a weak hadith, and lack of clarity on what weak hadith means. To say that a hadith is weak, that is not equivalent to saying that it's fabricated. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that the hadith is made up. All it means is that the likelihood and the qualification of this hadith in relation to the comparison of other chains and other texts and whatnot, this hadith is the weakest form of evidence. It's still evidence, but it's the weakest form of evidence. It can be ignored in certain situations. So it's, again, the likelihood of the Prophet ﷺ saying or doing what's in the hadith is very low, but it's still there. So the scholars had three opinions regarding this. The first opinion, which is attributed to Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi al-Andalusi, and others, and some others, he said that it's completely not permissible at all to act upon a weak hadith. This is absolute statement, full stop. If the hadith is weak, you can't use it, period. The second opinion is the other extreme. So we have one extreme to the left, the other to the right, conservative, the other extreme to the left, completely liberal. In this situation, and it's to be used without reserve. It's fine, it's weak, we're okay with that. There's still a likelihood that the Prophet ﷺ said that. This opinion has been attributed to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Abu Dawud. The third opinion, which is the middle way, and that's the opinion that basically the Ummah is upon right now, and that's the opinion that they use, the majority of the scholars, that weak hadiths can be used in virtuous acts, wise counsels, stories, and anything that doesn't affect Islamic creed and or sacred law. I'll give you an example of this is, for example, if you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, a lot of the seerah is actually based on weak hadith. It's not fabricated seerah. It just means that the stories, the scholars were not as careful with the chains of transmission. This becomes really relevant when you come across very contentious stories that might put the Prophet ﷺ in less than pleasant light for some people. Ibn Ishaq, the first scholar to collect a book on seerah, when he was collecting the seerah, he wasn't really looking to authenticate chains of transmission or anything. He just collected all the stories that were prevalent during his time. Ibn Hisham wrote a summary of that. It's just a reworking of Ibn Ishaq. It's not till later that the scholars really started to sift through and make sure and get into this and get into that. Now, if you find a story that makes you just wonder, like, what's this? It's contradictory, clearly contradicting what I've known about my Prophet ﷺ regarding his mercy, or it's clearly contradictory to verses of the Quran, and you've checked that with scholars who told you this contradicts. It's not just you misunderstanding something. More than likely, the hadith that's been brought up here is not even weak, it's just fabricated. But our scholars just collected what was available. It was later scholars that sifted through and basically gone through and showed which can be used and which can't be used. At the end of the day, none of these hadiths had to do anything with aqeedah, with belief in Islam and in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so they weren't as careful with it. Now, this established opinion that you can use them in wise counsels, like cleanliness is next to godliness and things like that. The hadiths are classified as weak, but that doesn't mean, or like seek knowledge even in China. اطلبوا العلم ولو في الصين. That's a weak hadith. Does that mean that it's fabricated? No. Does that mean you can't tell it to Muslims? No. You can tell it to Muslims and have them go and seek knowledge, because it's a hadith that's enjoining virtue. The weakness is just a technical classification. Now, this is the established opinion amongst the majority of scholars. Al-Bayhaqi relates in his Madkhal from Ibn Mahdi that he said, if we related from the Prophet ﷺ on the halal and the haram, so the permissible and the impermissible, and the rulings, the ahkam, we were very restrictive with the chains of transmission and exercised extreme criticism of the biographies of men. But if we related on virtues and rewards and punishments, we loosened our requirements on the chains of transmission and forgave the men. And that was the statement that Al-Bayhaqi relates, and the Arabic of that is إذا روينا عن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم في الحلال والحرام والأحكام شددنا في الأسانيد وانتقدنا الرجال وإذا روينا في الفضائل والثواب والعقاب سهلنا في الأسانيد وتسامحنا في الرجال. So that's the statement of Ibn Mahdi that Al-Bayhaqi is relating in his Madkhal. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak also related something similar. Ibn Abd al-Barr, one of the great Maliki scholars and also muhaddith, he said that the hadiths of virtue don't need much to support them. Hadith al-Fada'il la yuhtaju fiha ila ma yuhtaju bihi. Imam al-Nawawi said something even more elaborate and very direct about this matter. In his Adhkar, the invocations, he says that قال العلماء من المحدثين والفقهاء, so the scholars of the hadith and the scholars of fiqh, jurisprudence, they said يجوز ويستحب العمل في الفضائل والترغيب بالحديث الضعيف ما لم يكن موضوعا وأما الأحكام كالحلال والحرام والبيع والنكاح والطلاق وغير ذلك فلا يعمل فيها إلا بالحديث الصحيح أو الحسن إلا أن يكون في احتياط في شيء من ذلك كما إذا ورد حديث ضعيف بكراهة بعض البيوع أو الأنكحة فإن المستحب أن يتنزه عنه ولكن لا يجب. So the English of that, is that the scholars of hadith and fiqh said it's permissible and encouraged to use weak hadiths to implore people to virtuous acts so long as the hadith isn't fabricated. But in rulings on halal, permissible, and haram, impermissible, and transactions and marriage and divorce and the like, it's not permissible to conduct these acts except with an authentic or good hadith, unless in the case of taking precaution and just being scrupulous, such as the case if it's been mentioned in a weak hadith that certain transactions are disliked. In that case, it's encouraged to abstain from such transactions, but it is not binding upon one to abstain from them. So this is a very direct and clear issue when it comes to the and clear ruling on the issue of weak hadiths and how can we use them. Now, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani gives 4 conditions required to be fulfilled for one to act upon a weak hadith. And they're very simple conditions. The first one is that it's on virtuous acts, like we just mentioned. The second one is that it's not extremely weak. أَلَّا يَكُونَ شَدِيدَ الضَّعْفِ. It's not extremely weak, such that there are liars or ones who have been accused of lying, or those whose mistakes are too grave that are in the chains of transmission, where the hadith basically becomes on the level of matruk. And the third condition, he says that it's under a principle that's already being acted upon. So you take something in the Sharia that is already a principle in Sharia that we act upon, and you need to just give it extra support, then you bring the weak hadith into it, that's fine. And the fourth one, he says that you don't assume you're getting the reward. Rather, you assume that you're taking the precaution. You're not going to assume that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the blessings of this or anything. لا تعتقد الجزاء به. That's the condition that Ibn Hajar is putting through here. You have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're taking the precaution, but you don't assume that it's assertive, I'm getting this reward. So just some final points to mention about this regarding the relating of weak hadith. It is permissible to relate a weak hadith without explicitly stating that it's weak, except in the matters related to theology or law. Now you'll have a lot of overzealous young Muslims that they want a classification for everything, and then when they hear a scholar relating a weak hadith, they almost lose respect for the scholar. Oh, look, he's using weak hadiths. Big example of this, Imam al-Ghazali, in a lot of his works. A lot of people assume that, oh, he was really weak in hadith. Look at all these weak hadiths that he's relating. Not realizing that you're dealing with a theologian, an usuli scholar, someone who did fiqh, who's got books on fiqh. And if you have books on fiqh, that means you understand where fiqh is about deriving rulings from the general proofs. And the general proofs include hadith. So he had to actually know what he was talking about. And he relates, he'll tell you if he's relating from Bukhari and Muslim, and then he just withholds if it's a weak hadith. And that's permissible. You don't have to tell people explicitly that the hadith is weak. Except if you're telling them something about theology, aqidah, something related to aqidah, or if it's something related to law, sharia rulings. Now, if you want to narrate a weak hadith, don't assert that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said or did something. Don't say qala Rasulullah. Rather, what you say is it's been related by some. قال بعضهم وروي أن رسول الله. You use a صيغة التمريض. It's like a weakened version to say that it's been related. It's been going around that the Prophet ﷺ said such and such, or that's how you say it. It's disliked to say قال Rasulullah because the classification of the hadith, matter of fact, is weak. The likelihood is lower than the likelihood of Sahih and Hasan, which in that case you actually have to say قال Rasulullah. So if it's a hadith that say Bukhari, then you have to say قال Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, asserted with jazm is what's called in Arabic. It's an assertion, and it's disliked to say ruya anna Rasulullah. Don't use the phrasing of on the authority. It's been said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. Be firm in your stating what the Prophet ﷺ said or did. If it's a Sahih or a Hasan hadith, and weak hadith, it's just been narrated, it's been related, such and such, and that's how you go about doing this. So that's just the issue with weak hadith. It's nothing to get all flustered about. The ruling among the majority of scholars is that it's fine, you can use it as long as it's virtuous acts. And if you hear scholars, and you'll hear a lot of scholars using a lot of weak hadiths when it comes to enjoining good, getting you to commit to virtuous acts. And if they're not telling you, they're not just ignorant of its weakness, it's actually how you do this. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the whole purpose of this is just to understand how the Islamic tradition is working and functioning, and to know how things are classified, and to know when things relate to aqeedah, when things relate to just rulings, when things relate to virtuous acts, and how to navigate your way through it. We'll leave it at that, inshaAllah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.